Firstly, thank you very much, Brinda. Thank you, Godrej Archives and Design Lab, for inviting us here. Sometimes Brinda and I kind of say that, okay, we finished this, we've got to continue. Let's find something else to do together. And it's very nice that a project that actually Rachel initiated, it's a project that came out of her idea, something that we are working on together, yes, and nice that we are being hosted here because as far as we're concerned, I think it's a work in progress. We're still figuring it out. We've still got a few more months left in the grant. We're hoping to get another grant soon, and Rachel will tell you a little bit more about it. But I think forums like these allow us to get a sense of where we are and hopefully get feedback and take our project forward in whatever way we can with conversations from all of you. To introduce you to the two other people here. And I'll start with Nikita. Nikita's work, I can't kind of remember exactly where I came across it, but when we were doing the book, we were sort of scoring every single form of seating in India. And I remember seeing some of the designs that you had done. Nikita runs a practice called SΑR STUDIO in Pune. And the particular product that we were charmed by, and I'm sure Nikita will tell us a little bit more about it, was the Āyāma Chair, a version of the chair which is slightly different from what you see here. And I'm going to ask you questions about that a bit later. She had designed that with Pascal, Hien, and we'll hear a bit more about that. So thank you so much for coming, because I think that will give us a completely different dimension to what we've been doing, actually. Our intention has been to take the project forward beyond just looking at history, but to what's the contemporary relevance of the chair today. Rachel, Dr. Rachel Lee, teaches at the TU Delft. She's faculty there. Today somebody was asking us how we came to know each other, I think, and it was an architect in Bangalore who kind of told both of us independently that you seem to have some common interests. You guys should talk. And that was it. That's how the initial thing started. But I think it was a few months later that Rachel actually approached me. Rachel has been working in India for very long. I might not get the entire biography right, but let me try. Her PhD or her main thesis was on looking at Kunisberger, the architect's work in India, particularly in Bangalore. And that started about 20 odd years back, I think.
2006, same time as the archive.
Same time, okay. And so she's been in and out of India. I think she looks for various excuses to come back and work here. So that's good to know. She's also she's an architect, trained architect, but also an architectural historian. And she sort of said that, I've come across your book. I've always wanted to do something about the planter's chair. Would you like to collaborate? And that's how the project sort of started. But I think you can introduce the project maybe a bit later or soon after that.
Okay, yeah, we prepared a short presentation to give you a little insight into what we've been up to. So this research has been funded by the Dutch research organization, the NWO it's called. And I was very surprised that a Dutch funding body, would be interested in funding such a project that basically allowed Sarita and I to work together, doing field work in India for quite a few months. It's a year-long project, and we have promised an article as an outcome. But people keep saying, you should make a book, you should make a book, you should make a book. So perhaps we shall make a book. And certainly the kind of visual material, which we'll show you a little of here, does seem to merit publication as a book. So, to begin with, this title slide shows the first depiction of the planter's chair that has been discovered so far, that is known at the moment, which of course doesn't mean it is the first depiction, but this is so far what we know to be the first one. And it's from 1851. It's called The Early Repast by a British artist. And it depicts, probably quite clearly, a military colonial scene somewhere in India. We don't know where. And in the center of the image, where you see the dog looking up at the man in the yellow jacket with his boots on, you can see the planter's chair. You can see it? Yeah. So this is sort of where the story begins, but it's really not, because we're not aiming with our project to tell the origin story of the planter's chair. We don't even think that's really possible. But we are interested in pushing against the singular narrative that has been told so far. Well, that's maybe putting it a little bit too extremely, but until now, the chair has been written about as a colonial chair. And when I've been visiting India, working on other projects, I had noticed that this planter's chair appears in all sorts of different contexts. So I found one that Ambedkar had owned and sat on and read on. And I thought, well, okay, colonial chair it may have been, but I don't think Ambedkar would have embraced it if that was the only way it was understood. Well, we've also found chairs in other places. Another one that I found early on was at the Tata Central Archives in Pune, on the terrace of the Sassoon Institute in Kalagoda. So we're trying to collect stories that complicate this narrative that we know so far, and to understand more about what this object, as Verundo was saying, what is the power of this object to tell stories about Indian history and beyond.
So, as Rachel was saying, one of the things that we are keen to understand is what are the sort of meanings that the chair has, and how has the chair changed the way in which societies are looked at. What meanings has the chair carried in different cultural contexts, in a sense, and how has it contributed to shaping society and space? Yesterday, we actually had an opportunity to look at this photograph in its actual physical form. I have used it in my book earlier, but I hadn't seen it as part of a larger album, and we were quite amazed at the sort of series of images that preceded and sort of followed it, because they clearly indicated a certain way of life, very, very, discomforting in a lot of ways. But we just wanted to start off with putting this question out to all of you, and maybe if some of you would like to answer, what do you feel is wrong with this picture? Anybody? Nikita. I think. Thank you.
One white man, I think it's not a very nice picture. I have seen it as well. And I have really pondered, maybe these thoughts are going through your mind as well, excuse me, Henry, you're one of us, but with one white man lounging on this chair, and three, they used to be called native servants. I mean, I would call it domestic help today. And he's just doing daydreaming, which is what many people do on this chair. and it's a bad story, but it did happen, so you cannot erase that history. And we historically said a lot of things about this, the heat of the country. We don't know which part of the world it is, but the way the help is dressed, they too are feeling the heat, and they have their distinct, I think, two headgears. The two on the left have a skull cap, the other has a turban. He's probably wearing something warm and felt, and in a complete suit, which he hasn't gone quite native as yet. I'm not going to say anything more.
Thank you.
So yesterday, Rachel was so uncomfortable because some of the images before that had people wearing a kilt, and Rachel's from Scotland. There were other images after that of women, obviously posed, lying on the ground. It was all. It's definitely a posed picture. But other than the obvious race issues, the other thing that struck us was the gender. I mean, it's clearly, whether it's a gender-specific chair. Okay, so somewhere along, quite early on, actually not quite early on, somewhere in the first couple of months of our project, we sort of decided to define what we decided was a planter's chair, because firstly there are, and we'll come across that later in the next few slides, as to what are the names of this particular form of chair. But sometimes even today we were told that, okay, there is a planter's chair in this particular library, say when we were in Kolkata, but when we went there we realized it was what we decided to call was the library chair. So what then defines what we decide is the form of a planter's chair. So should a planter's chair necessarily have a low seat? We said yes. Extended armrests that work as footrests? Yes. Does the seat and back have to be cane woven? We said no, because we have seen canvas, plastic cane weaves, leather and cloth upholstery. Must the armrest pivot and retract? Not necessarily. Must the armrest be flat? Not necessarily. Some of them have a dip and a curve. Should the seat in the back be a continuous weave? Not necessarily, because the seat in the back can be separate piece, separately sort of pieced, so to speak. And we've got some examples here of all of that.
Yeah. And as Sarita mentioned, this chair also comes with many monikers. It has quite a few names. This is in Brewer's Dictionary of Phrase and Fable, and it was the historian Simin Patel that drew our attention to this source. You may know her as Bombay Wala, historical works. Yeah, so in Bombay, the chair is famously known as the Bombay fornicator. And you can see here in this edition of Brewer's Dictionary of Phrase and Fable, Bombay has an entry, and there are only 3 other entries, this being one of them, which is, I don't know, it's a sort of interesting that it has made it into that dictionary. And yeah, they're an Anglo-Indian term denoting a wicker chair with an extended footrest long enough to facilitate sexual intercourse. And of course, because of this kind of titillating description of the chair, it is something that we've come across quite a few times in our research as well, with an antique dealer in Kolkata who we interviewed, telling us that it's also known as the Singapore fornicator. So it's not limited to Bombay, but Bombay seems to be the only one that's made it into a dictionary. But more about that we have not really been able to discover. But who knows what will happen.
Yeah, I kind of find it curious actually that none of the other words as well, like what makes a bloomer a Bombay bloomer? What makes, why was the Bombay duck called a Bombay duck is something that I don't think, we haven't found out in reasons as well. So definitely, I mean, the planter's chair as an image that it in various ways it is form this sort of backdrop of colonial life. It conjured images of men of some authority in repose, sometimes with a gin and tonic, hands, feet up, definitely, masters of all that they surveyed. There was also, and a lot of them, a lot of times we found that they have featured in various fantasies, sort of these idyllic fantasies of what colonial life is like. And these are from some of the books, Lloyd's Sketches of Indian Life, as well as that's from the 1890s. These two images on the left. The one in the middle is a very satirical take on various forms of Indian living during the colonial period. It's called Curry and Rice. But what we definitely felt was that no other chair, in a sense, seems to reveal the hierarchies and gender disparities that existed in practices of comfort during the British colonial period, or at least the colonial period itself, as much as this planter's chair.
And maybe also to say here that you can see the image on the top right is actually a postcard that was sent from India to the UK. I can't remember where exactly. It's in the collection of Claire Arney, who's a photographer in Bangalore. Her father collected these early 20th century postcards. So it is a photograph there, and the lower one as well, caught napping, obviously poking fun at this gentleman who's fallen asleep while reading a newspaper. But it's not a chair that many people allow themselves to be photographed on. So it appears more often, I would say, in sketches and prints and lithographs where people are using it humorously rather than in a serious photographic setting, although chairs often do feature in photographs as a marker of status, and I think also as a way of keeping the subject still.
Yeah, Saloni Mathur has actually written a lot about what was the purpose of postcards of that period. They sort of they went on to, in a sense, to propagate this idea of a native view and what is a colonial view and things like that.
Yeah, and here you see some more drawings and possibly a photograph at the top right of colonial bad behavior, I would say, associated with this chair. So you can see next to the various sitters, there are bottles of wine, cigarettes, smoking implements. The bottom right one is actually a Dutch image. So it comes from a publication that was made in the Netherlands. So the chair was not only a British colonial chair, it was a chair that also spread into other colonies or was developed simultaneously in other colonies. We don't know. So this one is in Indonesia.
I don't think this is highlighted, but this says, "Hi, chokra, come and bring me a cigar." And you can see what the chokra is out to give.
Yeah.
To serve and stuff.
Yeah, the teapot and the long armchair. I'll also have a drink. I hope the water's iced with care. Now go and let me think, he says. As well as looking at archival sources, so we've been looking at archives in the Netherlands, we've been looking at archives here, trying to find evidence of this chair, which is not the easiest thing to do because chairs are not something that are often catalogued in archives, so they're not so easy to find. We've also been looking at literature and other forms of cultural expression, and perhaps not surprisingly, in George Orwell's Burmese Days, the chair also appears. So every time we come across one of these references, we're very happy, but we have to do quite a bit of reading to find them. Yeah, so here he says, "The veranda was wide and dark, with low eaves from which baskets of fern hung, making it seem like a cave behind a waterfall of sunlight. it was furnished with long cane-bottomed chairs made in the jail. So here is a kind of evidence that we have not come across anywhere else, that prisoners were used in the production of furniture for the British. And at one end, there was a bookcase containing a rather unappetizing little library, many books of essays of the Emerson, Carlyle, Stevenson type. The doctor, a great reader, liked his books to have what he called a moral meaning. Well, doctor, said Florey. The doctor had meanwhile thrust him into a long chair, pulled out the leg rests so that he could lie down, and put cigarettes and beer within reach. Well, doctor, and how are things? How is the British Empire? Sick of the palsy as usual?
We had actually, when we'd gone to the Alipur jail in, which has now become a museum in Kolkata, we tried to find out if there, were prisoners made to work there. We couldn't quite find out, but we were very curious about this. I mean, whether the chairs were actually, or other objects were made in prison during the time.
Ah, yes, and we've also found evidence of the chair in films. So this is the first film that was shot on location outside of the Netherlands. It was filmed in Indonesia in 1936, sorry. It's based on a novel by a woman writer from 1931 that's quite autobiographical and addresses her experiences living on rubber plantations in Indonesia. The film and the book are both called Rubber. And here in the opening few minutes of the film, the chair takes on something of a starring role, really enabling the manager of the rubber plantation, here you can see him, to behave very badly. So he's smoking, he's drinking, he takes a beer bottle, throws it out the door. You hear it smashing outside as it lands on the ground. And I don't know if you can read what the captions say, but one of them says, "What's keeping my beer?" White women mean trouble here. What else do we have? Damn those white women.
Yeah, where are you?
Ruining the atmosphere in our club. Yeah.
We'd already, it was kind of already, there was this picture of the chair was part of a set of objects, of which, the drink, the chokra, not the woman, a teapoy, were all part of this tableau of, of colonial power and disrespect.
Yeah. But it also appears in Indian cinema. In Calcutta, we were really glad to be able to visit Satyajit Ray's archive. He has used the chair in some of his films. But here we're showing an image from a movie from 1996 from Tamil Nadu called Hindustani or Indian, where the chair is used in a fight scene. And you can see here images of a man, Sarita.
There's a gun there, or a revolver.
Yeah, so the man in the chair is being threatened with a gun, and he takes one of the chair's movable armrests and whacks the guy in the side with it, which causes him to fall on the floor. And then, he's able to disarm him and possibly kill him. So it's more than a simple piece of furniture. It's also a weapon.
If you can't recognize the actor, that's Kamala Hassan and Nedumudi Venu from Kerala. So, in a sense, the chair by the early to the mid 20th century had come to be considered a prerequisite for almost every colonial British household. So it was listed under this in this catalogue called the Barrack and Camp Equipment in this specific case, the 1907 Army and Navy catalogue. And what we came to discover is that it's clearly employed even today by contemporary decorators trying to recreate a colonial type lifestyle. The images on the top are from an antique dealer in Singapore who sources a lot of these chairs in India. They're called the Past Perfect collection. Some of the others are from, we've seen the chair on auction sites all over the world actually, and we'll show you a few. For instance, the image on the left was sent to us by Abigail McCowan. Most of you might know of her. She knew about this sort of chair chase that we were on, and she saw this in an antique store in New Hampshire and said, hey, have a look at this. And I was kind of curious about the fact that it came, there was a tableau that was created with this, the safari hat and postcard and things like that. So it was obviously selling an idea and an image of a certain colonial lifestyle along with the chair. The image on the right actually came to us from a friend of mine who has a plantation in Kerala, and I sort of said, Roshan, I'm sure you have the chair in your home. So she said, yes, do go visit my home in Kerala and have a look at it. But you know what? My sister in Canada had recently acquired this chair. She'll send you a photo of it. So she sends us a photo of it. And then when we looked at the detail, the little image of the coin that you say, it says 1949 or 47 maybe, Dutch East Indies. And that's when we realized that it wasn't from India at all. It was from Indonesia. The use of the coin we haven't found in Indian chairs as much, but nearly a lot of the Indonesian coins seem to have it. What we've been doing is conducting a lot of oral histories, interviews. We are speaking to people who have the chair, have a memory of the chair, and you probably can't read the details of it, but it's been an interesting journey to sort of understand why do people still keep the chair. So this lady who wrote to us saw some of our posts on Instagram and said, I have this chair. The reason I actually went and bought a chair because of my memories of sitting on it at my uncle's, when my uncle was a manager at a tea plantation in Darjeeling. So there seems to be a draw or some sort of a nostalgia inbuilt into this chair that makes people who may not have inherited it still go and look out for it.
Yeah, so these are a few quotes from some of the oral histories that we have been collecting. We have many, many more to add from our week in Bombay. So perhaps also in relation to the fornicator, we have the first one where it says it really is a chair for gynecological consults.
That was told to us by an antique dealer in Kerala. He was like...
Yeah, he was kind of delighted when he told us that. You can see there Tagore sitting on one or a very similar one. We're not quite sure. Then somebody else says your expression changes when you sit on it, like it does something to you physically. It's not something you sit upon to get photographed, as we mentioned earlier, because it does put you in this reclined position of repose, where you are, exposed as well in a way. Then further along, with a dhoti and loose clothes, no, very indiscreet. So there's also a question about what you can wear when you sit on this chair. So I know sometimes we've generally been wearing trousers on our on our trips, but Sarita was wearing a skirt when we visited the Ripon Club. And yeah, there she had to think twice about what she did when she tried them out there. It's difficult to get up from. Maybe that's something to do with the extreme state of relaxation that it puts you in, but also something to do with the depth of the seat, how low it is to the floor. It's not easy to stand up from. And then, a woman in Kottayam told us, I would only sit on it when my husband was away on tour. I don't know, Sarita, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, it was kind of funny because it took a while to sort of, because we kept saying who owns the chair, whose chair is it, and her husband said, you know, yeah, I sit on it every afternoon. And it took a while for her to sort of say this in front of her husband. It wasn't as though there was sort of, she was comfortable enough, but I think it took a while for her to actually acknowledge that she does sit on it and that she does enjoy the sort of leisure and the whole, and the atmosphere of it. You know, it took a while for her to acknowledge it.
Yeah, and we have heard from several other people that, especially in couples, when we've interviewed couples, that it's the man that generally sits on the chair because the woman is too busy.
Oh, yeah.
With other things, that even when they visit their weekend home, their holiday home, wherever that may be, that the man likes to sit down and plant himself in it, while the woman is busy organizing all the other things that belong to daily life. So, yeah, the gender aspect is still there. We're also looking at the spaces where the chair is placed in the different buildings that it occupies. So it's clearly a chair that's often found on verandas as well as in bedrooms and halls. But yeah, it is a very sort of typical veranda chair. This quotation on the right is from a Dutch book about Dutch colonial furniture. And where you read Indian here, they mean Indonesian. So it says the Chinese also invented those strange, lazy Indian chairs, those armrests with pull-out slats. Yeah, so here we have a different theory about the origin of the chair, and that it's not a British chair at all, that it's a Chinese chair. And we've done a little bit of probing into this and have discovered some images of Chinese chairs that do have these extended armrest, leg rests. So it's a nice theory that complicates the picture.
Yeah. I think a lot of our research seems to get further complicated as we go along rather than sort of reaching any sort of conclusion. But what was interesting is this idea of the chair for a veranda was also, just yesterday when we were speaking to someone or a couple of people, they said, you know, they were everywhere. They were everywhere in Bengal. So in a sense, the chair wasn't a precious chair. It was something that could be pulled out when necessary. When you go to your holiday home, it can be kept in at your holiday home, pulled out when you reach. Because and also the veranda wasn't a place where you keep things that are valuable. So the chair wasn't really a precious chair, but at the same time, it did manage to, you know, there was inherently a sense of power and gender hierarchies associated with it.
Yeah. So, yeah, we are also questioning the colonial narrative with what we're doing, and we're interested in looking at ways where the chair is decolonized. So how can this probably colonial object be used or become something that's that can also decolonize? So one thing that we thought of was that women using this chair and taking up space with it, because it is a typical kind of, it's a chair that really enables manspreading like no other. So women sitting on this chair and using it, goes against the grain of the narrative, and you can see this in the Lloyd's Sketches of Indian Life illustration on the right, that women did sometimes sit on it, but not in the way that it was intended, because that would be inappropriate. But Sarita and I have no qualms.
When we're wearing trousers.
When we're wearing trousers.
But I do know that my grandfather, when we had the chair in our veranda in our house in Kerala, and I was allowed to sit on it because I was a favored grandchild, but it was very clear that if I do sit on it, I had to be wearing clothes that were appropriate. So, I mean, a Victorian lady, obviously, there is a sort of indecorous manner if she was going to sit on it. So in a sense, the chair was clearly the reserve of men, in a sense, and particularly those with authority and with privilege as well.
And this is a project from a Danish student who graduated in the Netherlands. And she designed this chair, which is called A Basic Instinct, probably in relation to the film from the 1980s, can't remember, 90s, with a famous scene of Sharon Stone uncrossing her legs. And so she made this chair to ask women to do that very thing.
Sort of have a more open body posture in a sense.
And take up space with their bodies.
And here you have an example of a postcard again, which offered, rather than a colonial view, a certain native view, or offered a satirical take on the colonial view, with the help at home actually taking over the chair when the master's away.
Okay.
Okay.
I think that's it from us. Thank you very much.
There is one more image which I wanted to show. Well, let me see if I can find it. But that was the image of from Nikita's.
Nikita's in the book.
Yeah.
Is it
Let me see if
also
I can-
marked here?
I don't know. Yeah, it is in the book. Maybe you could sort of pull it out if I can't find it.
Try and find it.
If I can find it. Yeah. No, I can't seem to find it. I'm sorry, Nikita. I planned it so well, but somehow I didn't. But I'd love to maybe ask you a few questions while we pull up the image.
Well, we do have the chair right here. So, of course, for everybody, the chair that we've been talking about is the Āyāma, which is right here. But yeah, so we can skip the image.
Yeah, so one of the questions that I actually had, Nikita, about your chair was that you mentioned that here it is. Sorry, it's still at a. You mentioned that your inspiration for this chair was from the Sankeda furniture.
Yes.
So that was one question I had. The other question really was that to try and understand whether it was the joinery that was inspired from Sankeda. Was it the form? I mean, the form clearly shows some sort of a lineage to the planter's chair.
Correct.
But, and the second question, so that I don't interrupt you while you talk to us, was what are the reasons, how do you see are the reasons for people wanting to purchase this chair? Is it a memory of the planter's chair, a memory of the Sankeda chair, or are they connecting to the form that you've created?
Cool. Well, I think generally it's going to be a super long answer, but I'll just begin the story of how this entire design process started. So, of course, to give you the background about the planter's chair, what Rachel and Sarita has put forth is really, really cool. Of course, I knew so many of those reasons, but a lot of the things that you discussed, like it being gender sensitive, like these were things that I hadn't noticed. So it's really nice to kind of, think about it in that way. Just to talk about how we designed this, so the conception of it, I would say that there are always two ways of how we start a design process. A chair that is truly original in a way, which is, sort of built at the right point of time, and it kind of does all the right things to surpass and become timeless. So eventually, which kind of becomes iconic, right? So this, what we see here is pretty much an archetype. It's iconic. And today, if you were to buy this, I'm sure it's going to be considered as a vintage piece or, something that's really got down from history. So what have we done here is, I would say, more of evolution that you see in design, right? So it is more of a reinterpretation. And funnily, I don't think that I would, in a way, like when I think about the time I started designing this chair, this was in 2017, and with a colleague of mine, Pascal, like you mentioned. So in this particular case, we are trying to look at a collection which was called as Reclaimed Stories. And Reclaimed Stories was more about looking at the current situation of the modern times and what sort of furniture are we demanding, right? So in that particular case, one of the things that kind of started the conversation was the craft or the technique behind construction of furniture, right? Because this is where suddenly a couple of limitations sort of start posing. Second is the nostalgic part of it. So like we've been talking about this a lot, and of course, because this is a reinterpretation or it's like an evolution of design, you have that nostalgia of, where it comes from in a way. So what I feel is that whenever we are designing a new chair, in today's time, we no longer have the luxury of creating something that is, so big. If you see the resources used in it, the amount of material that's used in it, the weaving that it takes, the amount of man hours that probably go into building this structure. Unfortunately, I feel that we don't have that luxury left anymore to create pieces that can reach out a wider market. So that's when we start kind of as a design process, your entire brief starts changing. You want to build a chair that's smaller in size because we no longer have verandas, right? The spaces are getting smaller in a way. Then the chair is flat pack. So that again changes like the major perception behind design. Here we had everything that was robust, that was supposed to last like 150 years, right? It's going to be passed on through generations. So versus in that particular case, it's more or less the same idea that it is still a timeless piece. It is something that's going to, you can take care of it for a really long time because of the way it's constructed. You can break it down in parts. If you have some part that gets damaged, you can replace it easily. So coming to the point that the joinery of Sankheda was a choice made due to the fact that at this modern time, I think that's what we are really good at as a skill. It's a simple skill. It's kind of stripped down now. It doesn't have all of the ornamentations. It takes much lesser time to build it. We're able to do it skillfully. So the final result is far more detailed and it's far more cleaner in a way as opposed to, so yeah, I guess like all of these factors coming together is what really influences how the design process and the decisions kind of are impacted.
Thanks for that, Nikita. I was just wondering if Ms. Godrej, would you like to share something about this chair? This chair is actually from your family, I think.
Ever thought I'd be talking about this chair. So I have 3 of these chairs, and each one came from a grandparent. My maternal grandfather, my maternal grandmother, and this one. This chair was actually, we were tired of caning. It had become too expensive and the skills weren't there. So one year, my mother just decided to upholster this chair to match her curtains. So I still remember this print very vividly. It served its purpose, but after many long years, the upholstery wore, and it wasn't really meant to be, and I was also more educated and had a sensitivity to the correct way it should have been done, but this still hasn't been done the correct way. It's done in nylon, because these chairs used to sit on verandas. There was, on the west coast of India, with a lot of heavy rain and things like that. So when it came for restoration, the man wasn't available. I was getting tired of waiting. Not that we use this chair, but I said, just do the netting in whichever way you want, and we'll worry about it as this netting will also wear away. As a child, the one in my mother's father's home, and he was a very busy man. He was in the legal profession. But in the afternoons, sometimes I remember he would be in the chair and I would be demanding, I want to hear a story. You read me a story, put your legal papers aside, put your work aside. So you'd actually sit in this chair. He never stretched his legs out. You know how this chair opens up. He never stretched his legs out. He was a very tall man, over 6 feet. And he said, come on. And he had those half-rimmed, half-moon, gold-framed glasses. And he would read me a story. I must have been about, definitely under 6 years old, 7 years old. And it was very comfortable because I would rest my head on his shoulder and he would read me the story. They're very difficult to maintain to display in Bombay homes. So 2 chairs are in Goa, and exactly as you showed, a veranda looking inside the courtyard. Ours are not looking inside, they're outwards. And they're the smaller version of this planter's chair, slightly smaller. And as Henry was telling me, there was this was like this. I don't know whether it became like this because of the upholstery, but there was always an element of design which had picked up something from the feet, the legs of the chair. So the one in Goa has just small details like this, but very prettily carved now that we talk about it. But the biggest thing we found at home years ago in a loft was a baby planter's chair. And I think my grandparents, who spent a lot of time in old Gondal state, must have had the luxury of a lot of carpenters around. So we have a baby planter's chair, properly caned, rocking chair, which is a portable one. Everything dismantles, and I don't like it very much because sometimes someone's dusting something and the entire back and everything comes off. So I cheat sometimes. I just take a light, not exactly Fevicol, but just to keep it in place. Otherwise, and it's all, the joinery is all, groove, and yes, it's not, no nails. And to match the dining table chairs, there was a baby chair made in the same design. But I think that luxury of having craftsmen, carpenters, so I didn't know what to do with the baby chair. So I off to Goa, and lots of children who come there, babies, just find it so grown up to be able to sit in a chair just like their parents or father will be sitting. And I remember we have this, some slide this way, some slide outwards, and some slide in. Oh, okay. And some of them have a little hole to put your glass. And you did say you went to the Ripon Club, and after a heavy meal, all the lawyers take a nap there in the afternoon. And it's not so difficult to sit on. I do sit on it, but you do need a cushion. You do need something. And I've sat many times just reading, curled up, not with my legs dangling, but just curled up because it's big enough for a 5.5 foot, 4 foot person. So I never thought I'd be talking about this chair ever. And my parents must be having a good laugh, so must my grandparents. But I'd like to thank you all. Today is World Heritage Day, and I'm so glad the archives and Henry decided that we would do this talk here at the Innovation Center. And it's going to be a very lasting memory. Thank you very much, all 3 of you. Thank you.
Thank you. I wonder if anyone would like to share anything or ask questions of
So I don't want to necessarily wade into the complexities of colonialism and stuff like this, too. But it got me thinking about these objects of that have gained a lot of meaning from these unsavory situations. So I'm just thinking about, like, in the United States, the army jacket coming into vogue post-Vietnam, right? And these types of, like, young men's pursuits being sent off somewhere or something like this. And I was just wondering if these other objects, planter's chair, if there are other objects that you've come across that kind of, I feel like their meaning has been forged by in these things on both sides of conflicts and situations, or how that might, thinking about it from that perspective, how that might, outside of the particular, colonial project in India or Indonesia or something like this, a more kind of generalized look at these objects.
Well, definitely the material that an object is made of often influences, like you say, the connotations, the other meanings. And today, a lot of the objects that are made in ivory, which are, as a museum, someone from a museum professional background will say it's most artistic, it's so beautifully carved. But today these have come under question. There are members of the British royal family who want to have nothing to do with it. So I think the object and what it's made of, and the history behind the making of the object, the material itself, also in some ways have participated in the meanings of the object. But any other objects that you can think of that have these meanings?
I think it may also have resonance because it uncovers the whole economy and the machinery to support these systems, whether it is war, whether it's colonialism, whether it's these other things, right? You talk about Army, Navy as a whole economy within an economy, and maybe that's also why they're so resonant and ripe for co-opting, as you were saying, and decolonization, whether that is now or in, post-independence.
Yeah, I think any object which particularly is so to speak owned by a particular community, or a particular, like in this case, yes, people in power, men versus women, even age. Like, for instance, we've often had instances of people telling us that my grandmother used to sit on it. So I think any objects that have that connection, and even the size of an object, like what Nikita is doing, is sort of making an object a little bit more accessible by changing its size. So I think that there's something to that. I mean, we didn't think, and I didn't think of that, but I like the idea that you're actually physically changing the size so that it's suddenly more usable and accessible. It's this thing.
Yeah, to be more relevant to today's time.
Yeah.
Which actually I also had. You said that they were made pretty, like, they were produced, right? And in the South, even if I travel today, I see them quite a bit. But did it, like, at one point start getting rare, or like it diminished somehow? Like, because I don't see the presence of this chair as prominent as maybe some other, iconic Indian sort of references. So why is that maybe never really became such a big hit? Like, why isn't it there in everybody's homes?
I mean, I think definitely size has to do with it. For instance, the gentleman that we spoke with, who was shifting from his bigger family home to a flat in Kochi, he actually insisted that he will take the chair along with him. But size has something to do with it. But I would argue the other way around, that there's something about this chair that allows it to participate with modern styling or modern interiors, because it's not, the form itself is such that it can coexist in both spaces. But yesterday or day before, we had a conversation with somebody, and they were saying that they have this chair in their office, and a colleague had brought it because when he got married, his wife actually said it's either the chair or me. So, so there is something to, it can provoke strong emotions, I think.
Maybe just to add a little to that, I think really the size of the chair has been a huge factor in its decline, and that as more and more people have moved into apartments, they've had to say goodbye to them. Also because, I mean, you were saying you've seen them a lot in South India, so we've been tracking the chair around India mostly. And you can see that it has different expressions in its form in different geographies of India as well. And in Kolkata, for example, they're massive. They were very much bigger than the ones that we had seen in Kerala or in Goa or here. And the South Indian ones are also more curvy. And some of them have this dip in the armrest that I think was on one of the slides. So we're also looking at these different regional variations and trying to understand how those came to be, and the agency of local craftspeople in their production, and understanding that to some extent. It's very difficult though, because it has such a long history that obviously the people that were involved in making them back in the day, they're no longer with us. But yeah, the size, the sort of radius that it requires in a room, yeah. This one has the slots, so this is clearly a design innovation, that it doesn't have to rotate outside, so you can pull it. So you can put a side table beside it, and that will not be disturbed. Yeah. And I think one of the antique dealers that we spoke to, he said that there's not really ever been a decline in the demand for these chairs, that it's been pretty much constant in his career. And he's been working with Mahendra Doshi for 30 years. And yeah, he says they come, they go, they come, they go. He always has some and he always sells some. So there is a demand, particularly in second homes, where people have more space.
In Kochi, one of the major dealers, he always sells them. The dealer in Singapore, she showed me like so many. I mean, Raffles Hotels, of course. But this antique dealer in Singapore, who actually sources from India, she says there's always a demand for it. And she went through, I don't know, like 60, 70 of them in her career. Over. It's quite good. We went to the Vadala place, which had the he does.
So the reason why I asked is because also when we started working on this, and we were researching through, just like seatings in India, like what you have documented, like I seem to find references of the chair, but not really see them, around. In fact, in Pune, I think almost not. So in a way, it was this, that, okay, it has these crazy long arms, and it's like, it becomes like this very cool attribute that this chair has, which I think no other chair is having, right? And of course, the typical curve that you have on the seat, which is just like wanting you to laze in and kind of, sink in, was what we wanted to sort of integrate. So of course, that was your last question, that nostalgia was definitely like a big part for me to kind of see it in the chair, and then hopefully that we'll be able to see more of these in the city.
Well, your chair is much more comfortable than the than your, I sat on it. You don't need a cushion.
Did you try it out? Yes. 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 Yeah. But like I said, I have to confess that sometimes when these products are designed, I think, like I said again, this being of its own time and the scale of it, if I try to do this with the sling one, you automatically will compromise on a couple of ergonomics, because it's not possible. It has to be that large for it to give you the similar comfort. So of course, I mean, over a period of time and development, like that's what it kind of came to now as of today. But yeah, I think it's a beautiful piece.
I guess we'll continue discussing more, but we have one last question here. Arun?
I just wanted to, I'm just curious about it, whether in your research or something, you actually came to know really what are the origins of this design. Because if you look at it as a chair, and if you look at it from a design element, it's obviously a chair, which is, but if you look at the design of the body, or the human body on the chair, it's very similar to what ruler courts were planned, years, even today. If you actually see the body design in a ruler court, it has the head raised up, the center of the body sunk in, and the legs again going up naturally, because that's a position of relaxation. Like it's almost like and that's what many people always recommend, that your legs should be always raised if you want to sleep. So if you actually take this chair and look at it very differently, if you turn your neck and, just look at it with one leg, it's almost like a swing between those two trees in a beach or something. And it's very similar to even a ruler court. After a few months of sitting on it, the center actually sinks in. And if you look at it as a center of the chair, it's very similar to actually a ruler, very, very rudimentary, it's not a Victorian aristocratic piece of furniture. It's more a very place of furniture where people physically have to work, get tired, and then sit on it. So I think if I'm just very curious whether the origin of this design itself is very, is Victorian, or did they actually see it and then modify it into a chair, which is a chair? Like, they didn't like sitting on a cot because that's not very aristocratic, but they wanted to have a chair which also shows their head up to the people, because that's how the sarpanchas today sit on this in the village, verandas. So I was just curious about that part of it.
Well, that's something that has been fascinating us as well, and we've been collecting images of people sitting in similar positions. We didn't include them now in the presentation, but there is a longer history of chairs that are like hammocks. Palanquins obviously support the person entirely, but you also have ones that are not the sort of box-like ones, but ones that are made really like a hammock, where a person is carried across a landscape. But we've seen many images also of colonial life in the West Indies, where you see a man sitting on a chair with a footrest. And so the footrest also enables you to sit in that position. And yeah, so we can see maybe it was a kind of a development from the footrest, simplifying it into the chair. But we've also seen, and there's quite convincing images of this, where you have a man sitting on a veranda, and the columns of the veranda are then used as the foot supports. So again, you're sitting like in this position and relaxing.
This, origins of this chair is something that we're going to keep chasing, but I'm not very sure we'll get a definitive answer. One theory we have is that campaign furniture, which was, folding, and the first photo that we showed you in 1851 was clearly some form of a campaign that was happening, whether it's military or survey related or whatever else. It wasn't a folding chair, that one. But we do know that a lot of the early campaign furniture that came in, and also the furniture that came in with the first sort of entry of Europeans, were folding, because they could be used in the ship and then used on their campaigns. We have come across sort of similar forms of campaign easy chairs, folding metal with canvas sort of seats. So with the long armrests as well, arm or leg rest, whatever you might call it. So we're wondering if that, they came in for campaign, survey, or timber or military. When they started becoming more settled, the chairs started becoming not folding, but became heavier. They kind of stabilized and the same form, but non-folding. The term planter's chair itself indicates that it was used in plantations. And even today, some of the people we interviewed in Kottayam, for instance, said that the planters would come back in the afternoon with their dirty boots and needed to have a short siesta because it was hot, Indian summers or whatever else. So they'd put their feet up. The chokras would take off their shoes and they'd keep their feet up and they would have their siesta. So it kind of seemed to have evolved or metamorphed from campaign to plantation to easy chair to leisure to afternoon nap chair and such like.
They certainly have weak spots. That they generally, when we've seen them in disrepair, and they need to be recaned depending on the quality of the caning, I think. We've heard every 5 years if you use them regularly. They go where your bum is, basically. That becomes saggy and then eventually gives way, for want of a better word. Yeah, and just another association that we have had sort of simultaneously in Europe. There were developments in chairs in relation to healthcare, particularly in relation to tuberculosis treatment. So in sanatoriums, people were also encouraged to recline because it took the pressure off your lungs, and of also putting your feet up again, like it lowers your blood pressure, I think. So similar types of chairs were developed for that purpose in Europe. You also see similar types of chairs with a footrest that can be slid out from beneath the seat on ships. So on long journeys, it was also a way of encouraging the passengers to take rest and relax. And we have a lovely photograph of Gandhi on a steamer sitting on such a chair in a similar position. So I think there were many developments happening at the same time in different sort of contexts that all may have influenced this development.
The Adirondack chairs in North America, for instance, which are named after the mountains, because the back of the chair has a sort of a mountain-like this thing, is also used for patients who are recovering from tuberculosis for exactly the same reason, for